Special Operations Training Detachment, SOT-D West, Burro Team. Coming at you from NTC, off the radar.
This is Off the Radar. I'm Captain Weston Rich, an observer coach trainer for the Green Berets at the National Training Center. Welcome to part 2 of our conversation with Mo Bogert discussing medical training in large-scale combat operations at the National Training Center. If you haven't listened to part 1, please go back and give it a listen. During this episode, you will hear Mo and I discuss recommendations for preparing for the National Training Center, home station cross-training, and recommendations for equipment loadout and medical networks. I love that you talked about, cross-training there. So what do you recommend for a Special Forces or a soft medic at home station to cross-train their fellow soldiers on so that they can be equipped to do that prolonged casualty care scenario? Mm-hmm. Like what small little interventions you just talked about, like can you give some tangible examples?
Yeah, sure. Honestly, so I would say just basics. I mean, there's, I don't know how it was at other groups, but at least at 10th group, we were literally given a rubric by our battalion med that said specifically your ODA will be graded on these specific tasks of T-Tri-C, and it just went through a March algorithm and it laid out exactly what your guys should be trained in. So everybody on your team 100% should know March like the back of their hand. Additional things that, I would 100% say that a ODA needs to be prepared to do in the field is do a blood draw. Okay. So that's something obviously that medicine has come, it's gone away, but it's come back. So, I mean, it's taken us over 100 years to realize that fresh whole blood is the answer to saving dudes on the battlefield. I mean, we went through this whole rigmarole years ago of, hey, the hottest thing was normal saline. Okay, hey, no, we're gonna give the guy lactated ringers because it's got additional electrolytes in it. Oh no, the hottest thing now is Hextend because what's gonna save this dude is to get his blood pressure up to this certain level with this massive starch molecule. And then we realized, going through the GWAT era was, no, this is actually killing dudes because normal saline, lactated ringers, Hextend, none of that carries oxygen. So, yeah, okay, cool.
Doesn't it thin their blood?
Yeah, essentially you're thinning a dude's blood.
Yeah.
And none of that carries oxygen, which is what the guy needs to live. Yeah. And not only that, usually, guys don't have time to actually set that up through a buddy light, so like a little heating module. Okay. So they're pumping in cold fluids into a dude who's already losing body heat.
Then you have hypothermic.
Then you just that H in the Mark algorithm. Yeah, you can go ahead and throw that in trash. So it took us over 100 years to figure out that fresh whole blood was the answer. They were doing this stuff in World War I. So this is something that 100% needs to be done and cross-trained. A good example of this is my senior echo on my previous team. So he was my O negative low titer guy. Okay. So and for those of you that don't really understand what that means, basically, so O negative low titer is essentially your universal donor. Your O neg is the universal donor, and then the low titer basically means that he's got the lowest instance of antibodies that might actually create a reaction. Once you give that dude blood.
It's the holy grail of blood.
Yeah, it's the holy grail of blood. Fortunately, it's at least somewhat common. But I knew for a fact that if I were to go through a field exercise with that guy, and if I was working on a patient, I could call over to him and say, hey, get in my field bag and draw a unit of blood off yourself. And he could do it.
As long as he's not the patient.
Yeah, I mean, as long as, so, and that's kind of going into another conversation too of that. So, you need to have a pace plan built for your blood donors. So you can't just look at your team holistically and not holistically, but narrowly, and just look at like, okay, cool, I've got 12 guys on my team, including me, and first I'm going to go to this guy. Next I'm going to go to this guy. Next I'm going to go to this guy for blood. Well, what if you're working in split team ops? That's not going to work.
Yeah.
What if, God forbid, this dude dies? Okay, well, now you need to rewrite that whole thing. Mm-hmm. So your blood pace plan needs to be able to change and move over time depending on how your ODA is situated.
Oh my.
So that's something that like you absolutely need to do. Now kind of bridging out into a bigger picture. So your medical plan, basically your medical plan for a battlefield or battle space, that's something that is a little bit difficult to train in home station, but there's still ways that you could do it. And I challenge 18 Deltas to kind of go back to their teams and do this. So basically, honestly, it's as simple as just picking a country or an AO and build out a medical pace plan, like actually build a spider web of facilities or, not even medical facilities. Like you really got to think outside the box. Like, in LSCO environment, like where am I procuring my medical supplies from? Well, I'm probably not going to be able to get them from a hospital because they're going to be task saturated with their patients that they need to provide for. They're probably not going to be able to give me anything. We're taught in the course like, oh, talk to vets and stuff like that. Well, in a wartime environment, you really think a lot of the vets are going to be standing around just working out of their vet clinic when bombs are dropping around them? Probably not. So you really, really got to think outside the box. So like a couple examples that I thought of earlier were, husbandry services or like feed supply stores. Okay. So like obviously it's an example in the United States, but it still applies. So like I can go down to Tractor Supply right now, get ACE, gauze, needles, catheters, syringes. I can get antibiotics there. Yeah. So you really got to think outside the box. And then another thing I was going to think of too was, it's not common in the U.S., but it's actually very common outside of the U.S., are midwives. Yep. They're all over the place. They work outside their homes. Yeah. They have medical supplies. So you really got to start doing that. So I challenge 18 Deltas back in their home station is to just build themselves a scenario. Build out a giant medical network, just like we did at Robin Sage. Okay. You really nugging down and seeing like, where are these transportation networks? Where are my supply networks? Where are my evac networks? Draw that out and then show it to their leadership on a team and see like, explain it to them. It's like, does this make sense? Yeah. For a wartime scenario.
That's a great challenge. Do that for your next joint combined exchange training or whatever thing you're going overseas for. You already have a target country. You already know who your partner force is.
Exactly.
So, while you're researching to prepare for that, why don't you just expand your mission analysis? That was a great suggestion. I like the March suggestion and the blood transfusion, knowing blood pace, primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. I think training on, you mentioned vitals before, that would be something super good just to practice. It's a small thing, but like, hey, can you do it at night under stress while you're tired? Under red light, under nods, how are we taking pulse ox when we don't have a pulse ox sensor? How are we feeding the medic the correct information when he needs it? He needs to sleep, because I've seen teams. I can think of a team at our JRTC rotation that was doing great medical wise, but the medic was getting burnt out because he's like, I'm stay up all night with my patients. Okay, you can do that for
a night.
Yeah. You can do that for 12, 24 hours, but you're going to burn yourself out. So you got to depend on your other people. Yeah. And then like to expand that, obviously you want to use home station training to train your team, specifically this conversation, focused on special forces teams, but any special operations team. But then what do you want to present to your partner force in the times that you get a partner force? In our scenario here at the National Training Center and at the Joint Readiness Training Center, you get a partner force. Yeah. So knowing what authorities you have, and if it's large scale combat operations, probably prudent risk to not have necessarily a full understanding of authorities, but risk to force, risk to mission. I need to train these partner host nation soldiers how to do things like vitals, how to do the march algorithm, and there's probably some other really low-hanging fruit that I just haven't thought of that would be good for the detachment to know, and then to turn around if you have time to train your partners on, so that they're ready to go out on a mission too.
Oh yeah, and honestly, that can be literally as simple, and I'm talking super simple. Literally, just create SOPs, as simple as, hey, everybody, you're gonna have a tourniquet on your top left side, and you're gonna have a tourniquet, 2 tourniquets on your battle belt on the right side, or whatever that is, whatever your SOP is. But like knowing that and then putting that forward to your partner force is critical. You'd be surprised on how much I've seen dudes fiddle with trying to take a tourniquet off of a dude's kit because he doesn't know where it is. Or like the guy kind of breaks scenario and you're like, where's your tourniquet? Where's it? Oh, hey, it's in my pocket.
Yeah. So like, I guess the other part of that is layering that medical training into the other training.
Yeah.
Hey, if you're going to go do a flat range, maybe run a medical drill and practice that in between in between getting reps on the range.
Oh yeah.
As one example.
I mean, one thing I used to do on one of my previous teams was literally any day that we did like a team PT event in the morning, we would come back and, dudes are dehydrated. So it actually worked out really nicely is we would give each other IVs. And so that everybody was proficient at least getting IV access.
Yeah. Did you get your alpha to be able to stick somebody?
Actually, no, I take that back. He crushed it. He crushed it.
Better man than I. Better man than I. Okay, so what does a team need to know, to prepare for, a prolonged field care, prolonged casualty care if they're coming out to the National Training Center? Like, what does that look like? Obviously, don't give away the keys to the kingdom, but what's it look like?
Yeah, so I think there's a big discrepancy on what guys think they need and what they do or not, or like they don't need. I've seen teams come here, especially like when they're staged in the soft Ruba. Holy cow, their medical room is chock full of boxes, like so many boxes of stuff. And, I'm kind of looking at it and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, realistically, how much of this stuff are you actually going to take with you? I mean, it's cool that you've planned for all these contingencies, but how do you plan on transporting all this stuff? I would say at a bare minimum, and it's something, unfortunately, that I've seen a lot of teams actually kind of bypass, is certainly like you need to have a dedicated truck bag. I mean, it's kind of a training scar from our schoolhouse of being told like, hey, you need to be able to conduct 72 hours of PFC with your personal bag. That is not going to happen. You can't do that.
You're going to run out of supplies.
Yeah, like you're going to run out of supplies the first 12 hours. You need a truck bag that's actually got that. With that, have a dedicated bag for PFC that has, your basic monitoring equipment. Try to fit your ultrasound inside of it. Like that is a huge thing that teams should be taking with them, is that mobile ultrasound. That is a massive benefit out into the field.
Have you seen a team carry that out into the field?
No, none.
Okay.
But so having, so obviously having a dedicated PFC bag is important. I'm going to break away from the prolonged field care thing a little bit, but I think teams what also need to do is they need to have contingency bags set up, or maybe not contingency bags, but contingency kits set up. And I come at this from a real world problem that I saw. Was I had a team that came through that, I was just kind of going through the 18 Delta's medications, and the guy didn't have an EpiPen.
Okay.
So I'm asking him, I'm like, okay, are any of your guys allergic to anything? He's like, well, no. I'm like, okay, do you know if your partner force is allergic to anything? Well, I don't know. I was like, okay, well, granted, yes, you are in a scenario, cool, but in reality, you're still in Southern California, and in reality, there's still a lot of stinging, biting, venomous things that will put someone into anaphylaxis that you're probably going to need an EpiPen for.
Yeah.
So it's stuff like that, so a contingency kit, i.e., so, when I'm going out there and this is something that I'll usually pack inside that truck bag, is I'm going to have a crush kit with medications specifically designed to combat, rhabdomyolysis from a crush injury. I'm going to have a burn kit. So I'll have all my Silvagene dressings and stuff like that in it. I'm going to have an envenomation kit where I'm going to specifically put a EpiPen that I don't use for anything else, and it's going to be inside that kit. And I know for a fact if this dude gets bit and he starts showing signs of anaphylaxis, that I've got a kit ready to deal with that.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. And then don't be afraid to improvise things. So I see a lot of guys come out here packing just way too much stuff. And I'm going to use an example of that's something that's really bothered me for a while, is a junctional tourniquet. So I'm not going to mention the company that makes it, but there's junctional tourniquets out there. If you're not familiar with what a junctional tourniquet does, basically it applies pressure essentially to your femoral arteries so that, if you take a shot essentially down near the pelvis, I can block that arterial blood flow and basically prevent hemorrhaging inside of your pelvis. There are market junctional tourniquets that I have seen fail multiple times. Mm-hmm. Essentially what it does is has a little ball that you inflate, and it pushes this hard plastic into where, the artery sits. I've seen that little ball explode. I've seen it fall off. I've seen the parts break when they get cold. And so I'm not a huge fan of it, but you need to be prepared to improvise. I can make a junctional tourniquet with a Nalgene and 2 tourniquets.
Okay.
And I can actually put that on a guy faster than I can this pre-made junctional tourniquet. And it's just as effective. Okay. I guarantee every team guy has a Nalgene.
All right. Well, that's a great piece of advice. Be able to improvise, do field craft with medicine, something that, I haven't heard us talk about too much on Burro Team. Talk about field craft when it comes to like camouflage and stuff. But
and then another one too, I'll just throw it out there too, is, and actually one of the guys out here actually showed it to me, Master and Pat Aragorn, is a litter made out of tubular nylon.
Okay.
Super light, super compact. And granted, it's not going to be as comfortable to carry as, say, like a Talon litter, a hard litter, but you can pack it anywhere, and multiple guys can carry it.
Yeah.
So, just stuff like that.
Easier to take on the objective than a Talon or a Skedco.
Yeah, exactly.
More field expedient, too, probably.
Mm-hmm.
So, great suggestions. Does that burn kit that you're talking about, is that like chemical burns?
So that would actually be something else entirely. I'm glad you brought that up. So that's something I would definitely want to push 18 Deltas coming out here, and it's something I really haven't seen a lot of planning for, especially sitting in the MA briefs that the teams do prior to coming out here. It's something that is definitely overlooked, and I wish. Now, granted, this isn't like a commander's back brief.
Yeah,
it's just an MA brief, but it would be something. It would be nice to see it incorporated to some extent. Is now moving into a LSCO fight, there is a real world possibility to come under chem, and what I have not seen a team do out here to date is have an actual plan of action on how to deal with a chem scenario. I had a team, do a decent job when it happened to them on the spot, but I've yet to see a team actually go through contingency planning on how to deal with a chem patient or multiple chem patients, if that's the case. So if I were to build a kit, I would 100% have a burn kit, just thermal burns essentially. I would absolutely build a chem kit too.
Okay, so great suggestions. Is the prolong field care, casualty care kit separate from, say, like a MASCAL kit?
So those two are not mutually exclusive. I mean, you can absolutely have a MASCAL turn into a prolonged field care scenario.
Yeah.
And that is rough. But it's something that, we've chosen to kind of replicate here at NTC because it's a good training. It's an awesome training scenario. Those can kind of be one and the same. Because your prolonged field care kit is going to have the biggest collection of medical resources that you can provide. Now, that being said, I would still have a truck kit separate from my PFC kit that just has basic T-Tri-C stuff, extra tourniquets, extra halo chest seals, extra gauze, basically to manage that MASCAL scenario. Because once again, it's going to be on that 18 Delta to manage that MASCAL.
Yeah.
And that's again, well, that's another training scar that guys have kind of coming out of the course is during a MASCAL, that 18 Delta should not be sitting on each one of those individual patients. And once again, we're coming full circle back to cross training of their guys.
Yep.
Their guys need to be able to actually do that. That 18 Delta should be delegating those tasks to their individual guys to be like, hey, work on him. Give me an update. How's his status? Okay, cool. Hey, we're going to discontinue treatment. So MASCAL versus PFC, both of those are going to prevent essentially a moral dilemma. Mm-hmm. And I've in constructing these scenarios for these teams, I've tried to implement those into that because it's something that could actually happen. And essentially what I try to put them through is having to make the choice of, especially with a MASCAL, discontinuing treatment on one of their guys. Yeah. Because, hey, this guy is going to suck up all my resources and I might not be able to save him. Versus all those resources I could dictate to him, I can spread out amongst 4 other people and keep all 4 alive. That's a really tough decision to have to make, but it's a realistic decision that might actually happen. Moving into the PFC realm, let's say, for instance, that on a hypothetical, let's say, for instance, you've got some of your guys, you've got one of your guys injured and you've got one of your partner force guys injured.
Yep.
So let's say, for instance, where you're operating, American medical assets aren't able to penetrate that deep, but your partner force can, or a surrogate network can. If you're relying on transportation from your partner force network, are you going to make the decision to discontinue treatment on your partner force guy and burn that relationship and possibly not get evac'd? There's not, I don't have a correct answer for that. That's for the ODAs to kind of work through.
Yeah. Or, risk sending your own guy through that potentially untested network
exactly
to see if he makes it out the other side to get to higher treatment.
Sure.
Would you say, hey, I'm a team preparing to come to a combat training center. Should I be prepared for both a MASCAL and a prolonged casualty care scenario?
100%.
Okay.
100%.
And then with all this recommendation of equipment, I really appreciate that you mentioned like loadout, because we've seen teams be like, well, I know how long the scenario is, so I'll just load out and I'll just have everything.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's creating risk of itself, because teams typically have whatever vehicles they have loaded down.
Yep.
Probably beyond their capabilities. And they're just like, we're going to burn fuel and eat chow until we're under, the gross vehicle weight of this thing.
Yeah.
But we often see trucks go down for real things, flat tires.
All the time.
Drive shaft problem, whatever, like actual mechanical things that aren't like, hey, you hit a fake IED or a fake landmine. Like, no, nothing about the scenario caused you to have this mechanical issue.
That's just NTC.
Except you loaded down your truck and you drove it aggressively.
Yep.
And now you got to figure out what to do with 4 to 5 personnel and all the equipment that they have and all the equipment that was in the vehicle.
It's all the truck,
So like expectation management, I got 5 trucks, I'm gonna have 5 truck bags. Well, you also need food, water, fuel, bullets, other things.
Oh yeah.
So like that's a real risk to mission, real risk to force decision that ultimately lies with the detachment leadership. But like each MOS, the 18 Delta, the engineer sergeant, the Bravos, the communicator, you're going to have this conflict of interest of like, I want to bring my thing, but it doesn't fit in the truck.
Sure.
I want to bring the 81 millimeter mortar. Well, is that the best use of our equipment space or is it not? I don't know. Like maybe that's something I haven't seen a team bring an 81. 60s are pretty popular, but like
hey, it could happen.
you could like, we got to bring all these stingers, this javelin, this other thing, like, and what gets cut? Oh, well, we forgot our CBurn equipment. Like,
yeah.
Is that the right risk to force, risk to mission call? Like that's on each team to decide, but I do appreciate you bringing up, like, here's some recommendations on equipment you should have and a way to load it out.
And that's 100% on that 18 Delta. Like, as we're talking to the 18 Delta and planning considerations and actually informing the detachment commander on, you know, what the mission should be and that team sergeant on how to actually run that loadout, that's 100% on that 18 Delta to be able to inform them of, like, hey, these are the necessary medical requirements that we have in this AO that I absolutely have to bring. You know, if it's been historically known that, hey, you've been able to, you know, let's say like there's some fire station that's like 5 miles away or whatever. Okay, maybe we can cut back on some of the medical supplies because you know for a fact that this is going to be able to work. And this, once again, kind of goes back to, you know, coming to that detachment commander and that team sergeant with that medical layout of that AO and saying, this is what we're looking at. And be like, hey, if we're going to operate here tomorrow, okay, where are my coverage, you know, where's my little coverage bubbles of, hey, this asset that we know can cover a, you know, 30-kilometer radius. Oh, shoot, we're outside of that radius. Okay, I need to be prepared for possibly sitting on a guy an additional day, maybe. Yeah. But let's say you're inside that bubble. Okay, maybe I can dial it back a little bit. So the 18 Delta needs to be on point with that mission planning of, like, what's the phase of the operation look like and where does it sit in with these little coverage bubbles that I've got?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Like, and that starts during the mission analysis.
Yeah, that's way back.
That starts with, hey, you're going to a combat training center and here's the, deployment order.
Yeah.
And look through the annexes and read the op order and, like, understand your particular thing because you might need to crosstalk. I highly suggest you crosstalk with, you know, not only the detachment members within your detachment, but the civil affairs and whoever else is coming,
the other ODAs,
to the exercise, you know, with you, because those civil affairs are going to be really keen on understanding the civil infrastructure in the environment. And if there's any 4th Battalion type people coming out, like, crosstalk with them because they have a part in our scenario where they help flush out those things and you can get, you know, those requests for information answered so that, you know, you're in the box and you go, tomorrow we're going to go to this area. What do we have?
Yeah.
And you're not sitting there going, I don't know. At least hopefully you have a touch point of who can I call, send some kind of message to and ask, or I've already asked that question and I already know the general answer because that would be great. That would be, you know, an excellent way for a special forces medic to provide input into the planning process.
There was a really good thing that was stated. So the DoD's Joint Trauma Center came out with this article kind of talking about lessons learned from Ukraine and basically the challenges going from each phase of care, i.e. like point of injury to evac to, you know, what's needed for finalized care in a LSCO environment. One of the things that they mentioned in the article I really thought was really good because we always talk about operational overmatch, i.e. against like a near peer adversary, i.e. you know, whoever's got air superiority, whoever's got ground superiority, and now, especially now, whoever's got cyber superiority, space superiority, whatever that may be. It brought a really good concept into medical overmatch. And I was like, I never really actually considered that, but it actually makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Of who's got the more robust medical network in that AO, you or the enemy. And it's 100% on you to build that up to make sure that maintain that you have medical overmatch. Now, will it be limited? 100%, especially as an ODA in the deep fight. But do the best that you can. I think one of the best things of advice I can give ODAs coming out here is recognize that the minute you step on the ground, you are horrifically overmatched in every single way possible. Whether that be, you know, kinetic targeting, just manpower, comms, cyber, comms denial, medical resources, logistics. You are overmatched in every single way possible. But if you come out here recognizing that, your plans and contingencies will reflect your ability to combat that at least as best you can.
Wow. All right. Excellent way of putting that. I mean, you don't have to, you know, you're stealing it from wherever, but a way that I never thought of that. That's great. Switching gears a little bit, we'll still kind of talk about the medical stuff, but your role as an observer coach trainer and your approach to coaching and mentoring Special Forces medics, like, what do you do to help them through that medical scenario? And then after that, we'll talk about more like just the rotation in general.
Sure. Yeah. So, are you talking like the actual PFC scenario?
Yeah. Like if they are in a prolonged care situation.
So honestly, I've kind of noticed myself when I do it too, because normally I'm very, point-to-point personal with the teams, because I mean you kind of have to. I mean, you're observer controller. You're an OCT, but you're not there to be an enemy of the team. You're there to coach and be friendly. It's interesting because I find myself, as soon as that PFC scenario kicks off and they take those casualties, I find myself going into the training modes that I was in with SOCM. I get really analytical, really critical, and I just end up doing this deadpan voice that's not friendly at all.
Well, we are a victim of our own,
100%.
Upbringing,
Oh, yeah.
Don't be an RI or a ranger instructor.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly.
That's not what an OCT is about, like you said.
But mainly what I'm looking for, especially in those first 5 minutes of that scenario kicking off, is I want to see that delta, and it's kind of, it gives me a good snapshot of how the rest of the PFC scenario is going to go. If that delta is on point and knows his basics, and I'm 100% going to steal Major Hitzner, you had him out here, I'm going to steal his thunder and say, yes, it's all about the basics, because it absolutely is. If he can get through the trauma scenario and his guys are appropriately cross-trained, awesome. I'm going to ask him really specific questions of like, hey, what is your thoughts on this patient? Because it might be blatantly apparent to a guy that, hey, this dude will die no matter what I do as far as interventions. And I will require him to actually answer that honestly. Like, he needs to be able to make those on-the-point decisions. That's part of triage. Is you need to decide, hey, who can I defer treatment on versus who can I treat now versus, I can treat that dude, but it's just going to waste resources and I'm not going to be able to save him.
So that, I mean, you kind of mentioned it before, but that is a dilemma that they may see out here.
Yeah, and that's going to be
you
on
have
the
a
spot.
Casualty and you're like, I could use all my resources and there's still a 99% chance that dude dies.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so in working with the Delta too, like, so I'm going to continuously ask them questions like, hey, what is your plan now? Especially if the team went out and conducted a mission and didn't have a good medical pace plan or didn't go through contingency planning, when they actually did their, if they did MDMP or if they ended up doing a 5-paragraph op order before this mission, I'm going to ask them like, hey, what is your plan right now? And, I'll try to push them through, but it's on them to kind of work through and realize their shortcomings if they didn't come into this mission knowing that this is a possibility. I mean, and that's how teams should come into this area, is expect that you are in a LSCO fight. Expect at any point in time on any mission that you could get wiped out.
Yeah.
Like, that needs to be in guys' head. I think that's a big training scar from the GWAT area.
Yeah, I think it's kind of tough because there's only a certain amount of the exercise, but like that is a real possibility, especially if you are in a real large-scale combat operation. Like, something could happen and all of you could just become casualties or KIA. So definitely something to keep in the back of your mind. Treat it like it's real. Don't treat it like, well, I'm just going to get regenerated because this is training. Like, and the medical treatment that I've seen, whether it be prolonged or just a short duration, because like we kind of say 24 hours is the minimum for our prolonged medical training here, and like 72 is the max.
Yeah.
I see medical sergeants and just Green Berets in general being serious about the medical training that they get while they're out here in rotation. So I appreciate that, and I hope that future teams continue to do that. So take it seriously. Thank you for listening. Please join us next time for our final part of this conversation and learn about medical planning recommendations.
Thank you for listening to Off the Radar, where RSOF prepares for conflict. Like, subscribe, and share on your listening platform. Actions will determine the outcome.